Hello, welcome back to TCOMM Monday, the Color of Me Movement Monday. Today we're going to talk about a question that is definitely on the hearts and minds of many of our parents. How did this become the norm? Well, it's a very good question. And if you recall first noticing any signs of behavior or emotional outburst, your child being overwhelmed, you feeling overwhelmed with stress, because of their overactive behavior and emotions, this is when we start thinking about things that we can do to help our children. We first want to determine whether or not it's something that we've done to cause this behavior or reaction to a certain situation, or is it something someone else has done to cause this behavior or reaction to a certain situation. And that someone else could be someone at school, if you're homeschool, maybe someone in their homeschool programs, the homeschool sports, homeschool co-ops, someone at church, and maybe in one of the church groups. If your child plays an instrument, perhaps in the band or the orchestra, or maybe in a choir, any type of social setting that your children has ever been involved in. When your child starts to have acting out behavior or overwhelming emotions that they seem to be out of control and that you can't control and they can't control, you start to think about who caused it. Where did it come from? And then you start to think, what should I do about it? And what we normally do as parents is we find ways to change the situation surrounding the child or change our behavior so that it will hopefully change the child's behavior or reaction, assuming that their child's behavior towards us or a certain situation is a reaction. Oftentimes we come up with a lot of creative ideas and things to do. Perhaps there are school functions and we decide maybe we're not going to go to certain school functions, maybe basketball games or football games or any other sports, because maybe the crowd is exciting your child and your child becomes overwhelmed and agitated and they can't sit still. Maybe you think it's sitting for an extended period of time, they become overwhelmed. Maybe it's the bright lights that are going on around, everywhere, especially when you have a sports game and it's at night and you got all the bright lights and you think that that's overwhelming to your child. And so you start modifying things in your life. So you don't go to certain things. You don't go to school functions. You maybe don't go to family picnics and outings and gatherings. You don't go to weddings anymore. You skip some birthdays, especially if they're indoor birthday parties. So it's okay to go to outdoor birthday parties because then your child can run and around and he can, he or she can act and play and no one's really going to pay attention if they have an emotional outburst. And then you're able to discreetly go over there and help calm them down. So we change things. Perhaps we've stopped going to restaurants, particularly some formal dinner type restaurants where you have to sit down and order your meal for an extended period of time. You're sitting there, you're patiently waiting for them to bring your food. The child has an emotional outburst, and so you're like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. So we'll go to other places like, and I won't name the places, but pizza joints and burger joints and things like that, where the kids have like a play area and they can run around and play and maybe exert some of the energy. And you think, well, maybe it's because they don't have enough activities, or they need to be outside more, or maybe they're crying and they're upset because they're not getting certain foods. And so you start feeding them those foods without even considering any allergies or anything they may have. It's just that this is what they want. If it's ice cream, it's cake, it's cookies, whatever it is, and you give it to them. Anything that you can do to help calm them down, to help modify their behavior, to help keep them from acting out or becoming emotionally overwhelmed. We're not sure why we do that, but one reason that we do it is we try to change the situation in hopes that it will change our child, change their behavior, change their emotions. And unfortunately, as kids get older, what causes them to act out, that also changes. And so now we're changing other things. Like maybe at some time at some point, we could actually go out to an outdoor birthday party. We didn't do indoor, that was too much, but we were outdoor birthday parties. And then she started having outbursts at outdoor birthday parties. And so we said, well, we'll only go to birthday parties where it's close family members. And then things got difficult around close family members, and perhaps they stopped sending invites to you because they didn't want you to feel uncomfortable, they didn't want your child to feel uncomfortable, and they wanted their child to enjoy the birthday party. And so now all of a sudden, years later, you're sitting with your child. Your child is no longer a young child, no longer 4, 5, 6, 10. Now you're looking at a teenager. And the teenager wants to actually go and do those things that you've kind of protected them from. They want to go to the parties. They want to go hang out with their friends. They want to go to the movies. They want to be social and interactive. And you're trying to explain to the child that those places and those environments are just not good for you. They're not conducive to positive behavior for you. You can't control yourself. You feel overwhelmed when you're there, and you always call me and want me to come and pick you up, right? So you kind of normalize the negativity of their behavior and the negativity of their emotions without really addressing why your child has behavior and emotions. So you get to this point, okay, so now you're at the point where you're thinking, maybe my child has an issue and I didn't want to take them into the doctor because I didn't want them to feel sick. I didn't want to think that they were sick. I don't want other people to think that they were sick. So, but you finally decided, well, I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk to a therapist, and then I'm going to ask some questions, to see whether or not my child has an issue that maybe they need therapy for. Maybe the therapist can help a little better than I can. And sometimes you start with your primary care doctor, and then they refer you over to a mental health professional. Either way, here you are. You're sitting in front of the therapist. And you're answering questions. And some of the questions are, what are the behaviors that you've observed? This is the point where you get torn between behaviors that you've observed in totality versus the behaviors that you have observed that are now causing an issue. And sometimes, because we have normalized situations, because we have modified our entire surroundings, our entire life around stopping negative and unwanted behaviors in our children, we've changed some things. So now we can no longer really look at what's going on with our child with an open mind because we have normalized some things. We have normalized that when they're in crowds, they may have outbursts. They may run, they may scream, they may jump, they may act out somehow. So we don't take them to those places anymore. So that's not an issue anymore. So when you're sharing things with the therapist, you're trying to share maybe the new things that are come up. So now it's no longer in a crowded place, it's in any place, any public place. Maybe you were having a drive, you were going on vacation, and you stopped at a rest stop, and there were not very many people around, but you still had the outburst. And so you said, well, used to be a time where my child would have outbursts when we were in a place where there were a significant number of people, whether it was friends or families or strangers, and they had outbursts. So we don't go to crowded places anymore. But now the issue is that we're going to places where there are not very many people, and we're still struggling with outbursts. So the problem is we're having outbursts. That's the problem. And we ignore that it started very early on, years before, when they were very young, and we normalized it. So the question from the therapist, after they ask so many questions and you're responding to what's going on recently, and they ask you, how long? How long have you observed this behavior? And you say, well, for the last 3 months. Have you ever stopped to think about, perhaps it's been the last 3 years, the last 3 or 4 years? Because at some point, we normalize the behavior by modifying everything that we possibly could within our power and control around our children. We change the environment. And changing the environment is good to a certain point. But if the environment is not the cause of the problem, then we have to ask ourselves, when did negative behavior and outbursts unwanted emotions become the norm? When did it become the norm? And we have to remember to go all the way back to when it first happened, when you first saw a problem in your child. That's what the therapist is asking you. When did it become the norm? So that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about being a proactive parent, and we've talked about that before. In being a proactive parent, we have to be mindful of what is considered normal in our family, in our culture, in our beliefs around our children in the environment that we have them in. What is normal? And if just because your child is the only child that has a behavior doesn't mean that can't be the norm. That may be the norm for your family. But if you are watching your child, paying attention and being mindful of their behavior and their emotions, you have to think about one important thing, something that's more important than anything else going on around you. It's not about how other family members are reacting to your child's behavior. It's not about how you feel about your child's behavior. It's not about their friends and their socialization with others and how those people are reacting to their behavior. The one thing that you have to really consider in this entire process is how this is impacting the child. If your child is having behavior and emotional outbursts, feeling out of control and overwhelmed, they are overwhelmed and they want help for themselves. Sometimes, just deep down inside, their acting out is really saying to you, I need help. They don't want to be out of control. They don't want to be emotionally overwhelmed. So when you think about modifying the area around them, their surroundings, or taking them out of situations in order to help offset some of their emotional outbursts or their behaviors, think about the impact that it's having on them. If your child has to think about things like, well, I can't control myself, so I can't go and have fun with my friends. I don't know how to behave or react in certain situations, so I can't go to my cousin's wedding, or I can't go to the birthday party, or I can't have a birthday party. Or if I have a birthday party, I can only invite few people because this is what my parents can handle, or this is what my caregiver can handle, just a small number of people. That's not what you want your child to be thinking about. That's not what you want them to focus on. And whether they can verbalize their thoughts and feelings, that's irrelevant. Most children, if they are having a good time with their friends and all of a sudden something changes and then they can no longer meet with their friends, they start to blame themselves. They start to think about what's wrong with me. So when we're changing the environment around our children, we have to first think about, have we consulted with a professional to determine whether or not this is actually what I should be doing? And not that they're going to tell you exactly what you need to do. They're going to give you some feedback and some recommendations and some suggestions about what might be beneficial to your child. But at the same time, they're going to do an assessment on your child's behavior based on your feedback, based on your reporting, and help you determine whether or not this is something that maybe we should diagnose and treat your child for, or at least at a minimum, diagnose and inform you of things that we can do to change and help modify behavior and emotions in your children. So we have to really consider and think about, as we're watching our children grow, when they become teenagers, all the negative outbursts and overwhelming behaviors that they have, they're going to carry over until adulthood. So once they become teenagers, if we realize that we have now normalized situations, we do have to work to make positive changes in their lives, hopefully before they become teenagers, before they're starting to really miss hanging out with friends and doing fun things. You don't want your children to miss out on that. Everyone deserves to have friends, to have healthy, normal relationships, and learning how to develop those healthy and normal relationships. Most kids develop friendships very early on in their lives, and they carry on to the rest of their lives. And some people don't, and that's fine. But let's not let the negative outbursts and the behaviors and emotions of your children be an indicator as to whether or not they're going to have long-term friends. So we have to be proactive from the very beginning. We have to be mindful and watching our children and their behavior and what we could do to help them modify their behavior and what we could do to help them be comfortable in their environment and their social settings and their surroundings. So that's something that we have to think about. We have to ask ourselves, when did this become the norm? And it's basically, when did we change the environment so much that we're not doing fun things anymore, that our children are not having fun, that we're not enjoying their childhoods, that they're going to grow up and be adults and look back at their childhood and remember most of the time was kind of kept from hanging out with others and being surrounded and by others and in big areas because, they couldn't control their behavior and emotions. So we have to think about that. So that's the big scoop for this week is think about, when did it become the norm? How much do we want to give up in our lives for our children and our families in order to normalize a situation that does not need to be normalized, a situation that we can help change in other ways other than taking things in social settings and situations away from our children. So remember to like and share. I'm looking forward to sharing more wonderful thoughts and ideas with you as you're thinking about whether or not you should purchase the books from the Color Me movement, whether or not you should take your child in just to have an assessment. And sometimes, it's not a matter of actually giving a formal diagnosis. Perhaps you want to go in and ask questions, but now is the time. If you've ever thought about it and you're still curious about it and you still have situations that feel overwhelming and out of control, now is the time to go in and talk to your primary care provider or the therapist, any treatment care provider that you have that can help point you in the right direction. Remember, journal every day about your observations. Remember to write your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of what's going on and how you're reacting to your child's behavior as well in your journal. Be sure to do that. And if you have the workbook, be sure to work on your workbook every single week. Answer the questions so you'll have the information to be able to share with your therapist. Do not, under no circumstances, normalize negative behavior. Now is the time to move forward, do what's best for you and your child and your family, and get back to enjoying your life. Thank you so much for joining me at TCOMM Monday, and I look forward to seeing you next week.